So in this presentation, we're going to be going over parenthood and children and that relationship and really why people become parents and the effect that children have on parents. My name is David Bell, and I am in Marriage and the Family from Cal Baptist University. So before we get started, we're really going to look at four major areas. First, it's what factors need to be considered when deciding to become a parent. Secondly, it's how have the trends in parenting changed? And then the final two go hand in hand. It's the advantages of parenting in the 21st century versus the challenges that parents face in the 21st century. So, first, what factors need to be considered when deciding to be a parent or not? And there's several factors that come into this, whether it's money, time, your job, so many different things to consider. But before you even start to consider them, you need to make sure that you have a partner or a wife, a spouse, who is willing to go through this with you. Now, the most important thing in all of this is communication, communication, communication. And so we see that parents or couples who are looking to become a parent have to over communicate in order to let each other know really what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and what they want, whether it be adoption or not getting married and having a kid, or maybe the mother wants to be a single mother and not be in a partnership. All of these things have to be considered when deciding to be a parent. So there's a way of categorizing it. It's the rewards versus the cost, right? And there's always going to be rewards and there's always going to be costs. Now, one thing to look at is the opportunity costs. Now, when I say opportunity cost, that means you are sacrificing something else in order to do the thing you want. So, in the case of children, when you have children, you're sacrificing maybe your nightlife, you're sacrificing hanging out with friends, you're sacrificing finances, you're sacrificing your time in order to spend more time with a family. So you have to decide really what is the trade-off for you? Are you willing to sacrifice your time, career, money, all of these things because the trade-off of having a child is better than those things are? And there's definitely things to consider that are the negative of opportunity costs. So like when you have a child, maybe you do want to go out sometime. Well, now I'm going to need a babysitter. Now I'm going to need someone to watch my child, and how am I going to trust them? And all these different things come into to the whole premise of opportunity costs. Now, the second thing on here is that children affect couple happiness. This is both a positive and a negative aspect. So children can affect couple happiness in that, generally speaking, children make parents happier. They usually bring joy to someone's life. And so that being said, a couple's happiness can also be somewhat tested throughout parenting. If you have different parenting techniques, so say one parent is an authoritarian parent and the other is an authoritative, yes, you might both love your children the exact same. Yes, they might bring you happiness, but the difference in those parenting techniques is going to shine light and it's going to stress on your relationship if you're not on the same page. And so we see that children, when they act up or when they're doing something wrong, can affect a couple's happiness in a negative way, especially if the parenting technique is different. You guys are going to start testing each other, like, I don't think that he should get spanked. Well, I do. Well, I don't think he should be grounded. Well, I do. And that's going to affect that couple happiness. However, on the flip side of that, children can also bring so much more joy, so much more completion, so much more unity to a family, to a couple, right? It creates a bond greater in the couple because now they have something together, even if that is through adoption or any other means of having a child, a surrogate mother, anything like that, where it is not necessarily you and your partner who had the child, but you had a child together, and that child is yours, and that unity creates a joy in couples' lives. But then there's the final thing. during these conversations with your partner, during your conversations with your wife, your your other half, there's going to be a time when someone might say, you know what, I want to be child free, and I'm going to choose to be child free because the opportunity costs and the effect on my happiness are not great enough to outweigh the joy of having a child, or not outweigh what comes with a child, whether it be the difficulties, the finances, anything. So choosing to be child free is definitely an option, especially in today's times. It's not necessarily expected that people get married and have the atypical 2.2 children live in a middle class suburban home anymore. Life has changed and society has changed in such a way that people are now cohabitating or living alone or having children later. And so we see that a lot of people in society today are choosing to be child free because they have no expectation put on them that they should have a child. Secondly, how have the trends in parenthood changed? And we see huge changes. One of the main changes is actually in parenting techniques. The technique of authoritarian, which used to be the norm, has now become authoritative. And the difference is authoritarian is more focused on the discipline. It's less on the nurturing, whereas authoritative gives people a little bit more freedom. It's more of a guide. It's heavy on the nurturing and then heavy on guiding a child. And so you see that has been the norm now in parenting, whereas before it was authoritarian, say 50 years ago. But here's some other things to consider. The earlier versus later debate. Should I have a child right away? Should I wait until I'm in my 30s, maybe late 20s, late mid 30s? And we see that the trend in America has actually been for women to postpone childbearing due to many widely available types of contraceptions, which we'll get to in a second. But because people are able to have sex now without getting pregnant as often, we see that people are just waiting, and the trend from waiting for marriage is no longer prevalent in America. It's more, I want to experiment and see what's going on, and that's where contraceptions come in. They don't feel like they need to have a child or have sex and have a child and not be safe and anything like that, so they're able to postpone childbearing. But secondly, there's non-marital births. That's what I was just talking about just a second ago, is having a birth outside of a marriage. Maybe it's a cohabitation, maybe it's a partnership, maybe it's just finding someone that you wanted to have sex with and you got pregnant, and so we see that these are actually highest among young women, and that trend has been pretty constant in the last several decades, where young women more often than not are the ones having non-marital births. And so there's approximately 40% of births that are due to non-married women. And now this is due to societal changes where it's become more acceptable to actually have a child out of wedlock, whereas in the 1950s you would have been looked down upon, or you would have had people looking at you weird because you had a child outside of wedlock. And so we see that non-marital births are actually slightly increasing, but in the last decade or so, they've been pretty close to constant. But another widely used option is adoption. The main thing to think about when looking at adoption is the cost. That's the main drawback for many families. Now, adoptions actually also recently decreased because of contraceptions. So we see that people are waiting later to have children and are also not having as many children due to the effectiveness of contraception. So now there are just simply fewer infants to even adopt. So that's widely why adoption has decreased. And also the cost of adoption is significant, and so that is a major deciding factor. That's one of those things we go back to opportunity costs. The final thing is contraception and abortion. Now, now contraception means physical barriers, hormonal substances. So you have physical barriers such as condoms, hormonal substances such as birth control, pharmaceutical products such as Plan B. That's for uh, after you have sex and you weren't being safe. Now, contraception has led to a decrease in abortions because it's so effective. However, um, contraception has also led to a decrease in adoption. It's also led to an increase in promiscuity. So we see that there's pros and cons to contraception and abortion. In abortion, the debate is still very, very hot of whether it is it is right or wrong, and we're not really going to get into that right now. But we see that abortion is an option for people still to this day, whereas before it wasn't so much of an option. So, finally, what are the advantages and the challenges to parenting in the 21st century? Well, the advantages are that parents, on average, in the 21st century, usually have higher educations, they usually have higher paying jobs. Fathers become more emotionally involved, whereas if they had no children, they wouldn't be. Or in previous decades, where the father was removed because they were the primary provider of the household. And finally, a main advantage is that with the help of technology, parents can continue contact with their children and continue communication. So we see an increase in communication now more than ever. But whenever there's advantages, there's always challenges. So we see that the parenting role conflicts with the working role. We see that specifically in early parents, where one parent usually tries to stay home because they want to build that bond, but also the opportunity cost of hiring a nanny is not affordable for the parent. And so they figure that if we don't have to pay someone, but I can stay home, we are effectively saving money. But secondly, parents raise children in a society with conflicting values. So that's a huge challenge nowadays is so many different values are being spoken into a child's life that is really hard to stick to one value and teach that at home. And finally, we say that there's usually financial worries. Having a baby, especially an infant toddler, when they are constantly changing and growing, creates so much financial stress on a family that it can actually decrease the joy in a couple's life. Another thing is neighborhood safety. Where am I living? Is it safe for my child to be here? And finally, household conflicts. If these first two things are stressors, you're going to have conflicts, and they're all going to lead to this stress that you're going to have to carry a burden on your life, and it's going to decrease your happiness. Finally, there was a few citations to make. The adolescent childbearing has adolescent childbearing been eclipsed by non-marital childbearing? And we looked at that specifically in adoption and in young women being pregnant. Lamana Reedman and Stewart's marriages in the families and relationships was the basis for most of this information. And finally, opportunity cost. Anytime I mentioned that, we were going over what Leininger said in opportunity cost and just some definitions and examples of that. So I hope you were able to learn something from this today, and I hope you now have a better understanding of parenthood and children and how they relate to one another.